By the way, what do you think of Matt's haircut, John?
I think it's fine. It's high and tight. I like it.
There we go.
High,
See?
tight, but you know, sometimes when people get a haircut, they look younger. Like you look in your 20s.
Oh, well, thank you. I think it's the good lighting.
Me and John don't have the benefit of what you have. Like we're just
Well, you guys are in 1080p and I'm in 720, so it sort of blurs all my lines, which is nice. From ABM to PLG, from Medic to MedPick, the world of business is constantly evolving. We'll cover the who, what, where, when, why, and most importantly, how you get the transaction. I'm Matt Amundsen, and he's Craig Rosenberg. Let's get started.
By the way, John, where are you right now? I mean, I was just thinking, shoot, I'm doing the podcast from my house. We're like maybe 2 minutes from each other, or no? Are you in an office these days?
We're trying to do office days, Tuesdays, Thursdays. So I'm currently at the Spaces Clock Tower in San Mateo. You know, the one above the Sweet Green.
Yeah. Oh, how is that place? I'm driving by it forever.
It's all right. It's a little sterile, but they're being really flexible with me in terms of trying to accommodate what I need. Which is kind of like an office for 1 day a week. It's pretty non-standard.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
Nice.
All right. So everyone, just want to do our usual lead in on the guest, and we talk about B2B famous, not B2B fabulous, Matt. Don't worry. You know what's interesting is John's notoriety came about when notoriety, there was like scale in notoriety. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
B2B it was basically if you spoke at shows and got quoted in newspapers, like a PR effort. And then speaking, but John had, at the beginnings of Marketo, was taking to market this whole new way of thinking at the time when blogs and social and all these things came about that could really flywheel your content and your point of view. And so it's like really interesting. When John sort of came to market as the co-founder of Marketo, it was an incredible time in B2B. And because the whole idea of everything you guys were doing at Marketo was so new and interesting, and it was like most of the stuff I did with him, not talking about Marketo, he was talking about the new way of doing things,
Yeah.
which was really interesting stuff. And so I've been friends with John like you forever. It's always been cool to know him, and it's been cool to follow him and to learn and to watch the evolution of John. So I always tell everyone this. So John got us on the MQL lead tracking, like lead everything thing. Then he's like, well, wait a minute. Like, if I'm trying to get into the enterprise, I need a completely new point of view, and brought account-based to market. Really one of the best guys to listen to and to follow in that regard. And now he's in sort of phase 3 of John. And so, as we at the transaction try to help people understand the new playbook, there probably is like in the 3 people in the world that are most suited to have that conversation. And one of those guys is John Miller. So John, welcome to the transaction, man.
Thank you. Every time somebody says like, "Oh, I've known you forever," it's really just a sign of how old we're getting.
Yeah, no, I know.
I was thinking about this. There's been more time that I've known you than the time between the movie Twins coming out until I met you.
Well, man, Jesus, now you're killing us here. I love it.
That's
So
funny.
we've known each other a really long time.
Yeah, and so like this, and by the way, the transaction started because Matt and I were just talking B2B, and like we're like, let's go record it. It's like the same thing with you. It's like there's when we're talking business, there's always something to learn. So it's really cool to just be able to record this and share this with everyone. So the question that starts every transaction podcast is this. So what's something that the market thinks they're doing right? It could be approach, best practice, methodology, whatever. And then they're actually wrong or not thinking about it the right way? And what is that? And what should they be doing differently?
Yep.
And so to you.
I like to encapsulate in a pithy little line, which is that marketing is not a gumball machine. And I think, too many people, and frankly, we taught too many people that you can think of marketing that way. They can be like, here's some money, here's some investment, and you're going to use it to run your campaign. And I'm going to get gumballs out. I'm going to get MQLs out or opportunities out. And that it's a very, it was a very deterministic sort of approach, money in, campaigns out. And as a result, we sort of, got addicted to like this sugar rush of MQLs, thinking like I can just keep putting my quarters in and I'm going to keep getting these MQLs out. But that's not, I don't think that's the way buying works. Maybe it worked that way in 2008 or 2010 when we were building Marketo, and there was less noise and less competition. Fast forward to today, and what's happened is we've been just bombarding buyers kind of with the same tactics, and as when we send more content and more emails, more touches, we're not building relationships, we're burning them. So, I think we're seeing the effect of these mindsets today. We're seeing lower SDR productivity. We're seeing missed quotas. We're seeing slower growth. We're seeing poor marketing sales alignment, and ultimately, we're seeing high CMO turnover. So there's lots of ways to describe what's going on, but I think fundamentally is your point of view is just that playbook that we helped preach and define at Marketo, and you helped to help preach and define. It's just not working as well anymore, and I think it is time for something new.
I think Matt literally just had this conversation in front of me yesterday. Would you say, Matt?
Possible. We were at football yesterday.
Al, there's always that analogy. So, but look, I want to dig into like as you described. I mean, SDR productivity. I'd say. I mean, is it true? I don't know. You guys confirm this. I guess all of the sort of past playbook productivity's down, but it seems like SDR productivity is taking the the biggest hit.
I think that there's some truth to that. I don't have the numbers to back it up. The thing that I'll say anecdotally about SDR productivity is there are best practices that exist in sales development. And, Craig, Topo helped really illuminate and evangelize a lot of what they were. Things like, very tactical things like the triple touch and whatnot. And I just don't see that type of behavior anymore. What I see is, people load up, a sequence or a cadence into Outreach or Sales Loft. It's the same for absolutely everybody. It really feels like gone are the days where you'd see people hop on LinkedIn and be like, look at this email that I just got from a BDR, right? So what I think is above not just the fact that, marketing isn't as effective as it was using programmatic email marketing and BDRs aren't effective as they were, is really what we touched on a previous pod about the creativity element. You know, because these workflow tools are so prominent now, people are just kind of like, well, I can just kind of build a 12 email sequence or a 6 or 7 email / call cadence in my workflow tools, and they don't have to be great. They just need to tell people what we do, and the right people will see it and respond to it. And the reality is like even the right people may not be seeing it, and they're certainly not responding to it. So to me, it feels like that creativity piece is lost. But I think that, there's a huge opportunity using some of new technology today to actually increase that creativity piece.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say is like, so there was you guys might disagree with this. I don't know. But like, so, cause I was on the outside looking in, there was the Marketo point of view, which was very MQL focused, lead nurturing, email centric. Then there was the HubSpot play, which is beat the living crap out of the blog. That doesn't work either. And, just the volume blog doesn't work as much. It's like how many 300 to 500 blog posts that don't say anything are being created still with people sort of assuming from the old playbook that we just have to increase the amount of 300 to 500 word blog posts out there. Like that's another one. Like, as I think about things that we sort of got ingrained in our head that are no longer working. And I mean, there's a lot, but
What else doesn't work are, my bread and butter of writing big, meaty, definitive guides. I mean, that like we built Marketo's brand and frankly, probably big part of Engageo's brand on writing this 200-page, really valuable, if I may say, content, that we would then give away and then also repurpose into a bunch of different formats. Fast forward to 2024, those tactics aren't working either. There's partly the changing buyer and millennials and just different tastes for how people want to learn and all that kind of stuff. But I still think it just comes down to the core. Even what Matt was saying, it's like marketers and salespeople will overuse any tactic to the point of saturation and therefore destroying the tactic. And that's what's happened here. And in doing so, we've lost sight of, I think, the core fundamental. Right? Matt was saying it's creativity, which I think is part of it. But I think the true core fundamental is kind of a mindset of what's right for the customer. Does this actually add value? I think that's more than anything else what got lost in this sort of gumball mentality, more volume, more approach.
Before I transition you into the pillars of what we need to be thinking differently today, I do want to tell you guys that I'm trying to think when this was, 2008, maybe. Do you guys know Gretchen de Nicker, right? She was at Genius and she had just left Genius. And I was like, hey, well, how's it going? She's like, here's the thing. We're creating a machine that will eat the ability to even use the machine at some point, because we're trying to do marketing automation. And essentially that's what you guys are saying. These tools that we built, they were almost like temporary, right? Because we just beat the living crap out of them and defeated their effectiveness at some point because we beat the living crap out of them. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out for your Gretchen. Just a heads up. I never told John that one because John was remember how focused John was at Marketo? There was things I never messed with that guy on. I mean, I always wanted to learn from him, but man, there was things I just was like, this guy, there's nothing going to stop this guy. So now, John, let's transition. Like if you were going to sort of set us up to be thinking about the big things we should be thinking, I got the the big sort of conceptual idea that we have to go back to be thinking about the customer, but what are the other key areas that we should be thinking about today in the new playbook?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be implications of everything I'm talking about here in terms of how we measure and how we do attribution and how we set our budgets and all that kind of stuff. But how do we think about the mix of brand versus demand? But the more I thought about it, the more I really have realized it comes down to, is this, resisting kind of the short-term thinking and more focusing on kind of long-term, shifting from quantity to quality. And ultimately it's about treating buyers, as people, not quote unquote leads to be nurtured or kind of deals to be created. And this sounds, I mean, even coming out of my mouth, I can be like, wow, this sounds pretty squishy. And so I think, but it does start to imply, I think, some kind of true kind of fundamental things that we've lost our approach on. There's things that people talk about today that are best practices that fall right out of this, right? Like, create content, sure. But are you creating content that's so valuable people would pay for it? So that you can actually build, community, around subscriptions. And we've seen the rise of these paid Substacks. People are doing it can be done, right? It's a different approach, making it easy for people to try out and experience your products, whether that's a free trial or a product-led motion, or just like a demo, a click-through demo or something, making it easy for them to get pricing and packaging information and then connect with sales on their own terms. Right? How many companies are actually doing that? That's right by the buyer. Thinking about building community around your products, and for your prospects. Some companies are knocking it out of the park by doing that, but not everybody's doing that. Then after the sale, right? How much of your marketing budget or resources are being invested into post-sale advocacy, customer success, retention versus kind of new business, right? These are just examples of, if you really start with a principle of do right by the customer, these other things kind of fall out of it.
It's interesting because I hear people all the time saying, "Hey, we're customer centric. We're customer centric. We're customer centric." And almost none of them are doing what you just espoused there. And oftentimes those are always the things we're going to get to that next quarter. And then we're going to get to the quarter after, right? Because we're so intently focused on new customer acquisition that we forget all of those pieces because maybe they don't look good in a board deck. Maybe they don't ensure that your sales team is hitting quota at a high enough clip on a quarterly basis, and they're hard. They're also very difficult to execute.
We're going to have to talk about this. It's not just as hard. This goes against the grain of what CFOs and CEOs and PE companies are expecting from marketing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think moving companies is going to be challenging. And yet at the same time, I don't think there's alternatives, right? Because we can't keep doing more of the same. Like we all know the definition of that. But I also don't want to underemphasize or underestimate how hard it is, right? Because of the expectations of marketing and the quarterly pressures and what the PE firm expects, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think the other issue is I think that there's been so much time, that the gumball mentality of the old playbook focuses so much time and energy into talking about like the tactics of marketing, and like people like, oh, well, are you running enough webinars? And like, have you optimized this SDR sequence? That we sort of don't spend enough time on kind of the core fundamentals. Like, do we have product market fit? Right? What is our competitive positioning? Versus everybody else. How and perhaps most importantly, what is our reputation? Right? When we're not in the room and people are talking about us versus the competition, like what are they saying? All those things have a bigger impact on your go-to-market, than actually the quality of your demand gen programs. I like to say, if you have great product market fit and a strong positioning and a strong reputation, you can get away with really mediocre demand gen and you'll still create lots of pipeline. But even the best demand gen team in the world will really probably suffer if those fundamentals aren't in place.
That is the truth. So, what's funny is like, well, first of all, this is the reason we have sort of joystick driven CMOs and boardrooms is because of you and Matt, John, just as a heads up. I mean,
Well, you were involved too.
No, yeah. Don't absolve yourself from this.
I'll take my part of the blame.
but I do like this story. I mean, essentially you're describing reputation's a new piece to marketing, or maybe not, but this is marketing and go to market.
Yeah.
Because there was a time where you were right, though. Well, I'm not sure this is exactly how you said it, but something I took from this was like, you could stand up, you could actually copy other people in your market's topics and run webinars and get 300 people, let's say. You could. You could drive demand without what John said. Now you can't. And that, I think, is really interesting and a big change, but what your guys are calling for, well, what John's calling for that Matt was nodding, and I'm by the way, I agree with. Okay, what we are calling for is that's classic go-to-market marketing, and those things. They not only were lost, but like now they're required. And then on the customer thing, I'm not sure what happened there. Like where we lost sight of what the customer finds valuable. Is that just because everything worked before?
I mean, that was maybe part of it, but I think it's more like, there's so much pressure on the short term and like, deliver some number and I got to hit this quarter that it creates this dynamic to like to optimize for the short term over what's going to do be right in the long term. And I think just you turn that crank for 40 quarters over 10 years, and you end up with something that's like, sure, you're running the program volume because you need to run that much volume to hit your number. Like at Marketo, we used to do this. Like, oh, it's the end of it's the end of the month or the end of the quarter, right? We don't have, we haven't hit our MQL goal, right? So we call them catch-up campaigns. Like, well, let's just blast something else out, and like we would do it, and you know what? We would hit that MQL goal, but fine. So we did, maybe that quarter we hit our number, but I think over enough time, you keep doing that kind of thing without the quality behind it, and eventually you start to hurt your ability to make the number as opposed to help it.
Yeah. I think one thing that was really true about the definitive guides from Marketo, and probably the reason why, and this was true for Engagio as well, it was also true for brands like Outreach and SalesLoft, and it's not often true for other brands, is definitive guides that we did at Marketo were essentially a textbook on how to do marketing now. And there was a whole group of people that didn't know how to do it, right? Because there was a massive change going on in the B2B marketing space. And Marketo and some other brands were at the forefront of that. And so somebody had to go educate the market. Engagio, same thing. Now we've shifted to account-based marketing. Great. I understand why this is valuable, but I don't know tactically how to do it. And that's why the big guide works there. I think in other businesses, it doesn't work well because as revolutionary as you think your product is, it's kind of not, right? It's just kind of not. It might be slightly better. It might be slightly cheaper. It might give you a 10% efficiency gain. But transitioning from the world of using Bronto to going to a like full powered suite of a MarTech tool like Marketo is a real change. And then shifting to having an account-based platform is a real change. So I think one of the things that people lose sight of is, hey, do I have a great product? Is it selling well? Yes. That's awesome. Does it need a definitive guide to re-educate the masses on the sea change that our product is creating? Maybe not. Maybe not. And that's where shorter form content like videos, or let me just get you into the product so I can prove to you that you're going to see the same level of value from a cheaper product or whatever, are actually a better fit. So I think some of the things about Marketo that people tried to copy didn't work because their products weren't massively changing the market. And so I think all marketers need to be realistic about what John said earlier, which is, what does our customer really need? Right? If I'm trying to make, deploying a landing page 50% easier, do they need a 100-page guide on how to do that? Probably not. They need to see how the product works and how it's better than whatever the incumbent system that they're using is. So we have to not necessarily just take other people's playbooks and run with them, but we have to think about what's best for our customer given the product or service that we're selling.
How do we, on the earlier point you made, we know the relationship damage that we do, but like, what are other ways that we can build better relationships with the customer? Like, what tactics should we be thinking about now?
Well, I'm sort of struck by anybody listening to this right today, right, is engaging with an incredibly time consuming, rich form of content,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, like people always talk about, like, oh, well, all our buyers only have the attention spans of goldfish. There are going to be lots of people who are listening to this whole thing.
Yeah.
And and I think that's an example of, you can create content, it's long form, deep and engaging. It's got to be about, speak to an audience and deliver kind of a certain level of value. Obviously we're not talking about any products here, but most content shouldn't talk about the products, right? I mean, that's just a best practice, that everybody knows and not everybody follows.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes back to that reputation point. You said reputation is a new thing, by the way, and like, actually, to me, reputation is just a sort of a more CEO friendly word, name to the word brand.
Yeah.
And we can talk more about that. But how do you build your reputation, in the marketplace today? I think what a lot of people are doing is they are relying or purposely using the founder or other people in the company, to sort of, almost build kind of their personal brands. And that seems to work. You get to know a company and you start to build a positive view of them because of what that executive is sharing, specifically on LinkedIn, but kind of on other channels. The other tactic that seems to really be resonating, here in 2024 is companies that are producing research that is based on their proprietary data sets. And I think the two best examples out there today are Gong Labs, and then Carta. Those companies are doing a great job building their reputations, with useful, valuable content that, again, only they can produce from their data sets.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, but the people part equation of reputation building, I mean, isn't that what we started this show? Isn't that what John Miller did at Marketo?
To a degree, I think it does feel slightly different, right? I mean, like at Marketo, I didn't even put my name on most of the definitive guides. Like those were Marketo's definitive guides, not mine. I think to the extent that I got well known through any of that, it was probably took time, and it certainly wasn't deliberate. I think whereas today, partly because my new company is in stealth, like I'm doing a lot of my thought leadership under my own name and my own brand.
Yeah.
I am sort of building it under me. That's different, in terms of the intentionality of kind of how I'm approaching it.
The Transaction is presented by Ringmaster, the go-to branded podcast team. When Craig and I were thinking of starting this podcast, we had all the ideas in the world. But all the ideas in the world won't get you a great podcast. That's where Ringmaster comes in. They handle the creative, book guests, and do all the production for the podcast so we can focus on what we do best, talk to one another and our amazing guests. To discover how your company can leverage B2B podcasts to deliver outsized ROI, visit ringmaster.com today.
Got it. Okay.
I think it's right because right now, John Miller, the brand, is bigger than the brand that you have from Stealth, and like regathering, your followers and re-engaging your followers is the right way to prepare to take something from Stealth into public.
Yeah. The question is, like, when I was CMO at Demandbase, would Demandbase have been more successful if I had built more John Miller brand there? Right. Or, versus, kind of working on the Demandbase brand. In retrospect, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to dig into that, but certainly one of the competitors in the space had people associated with the brand.
Yep.
And so I think that's really interesting. We are big on that right now here. Matt and I, we had Adam Robinson on, who's like the textbook now in terms of building reputation on LinkedIn, including using negative reputation to build even more of a following. And then we had his consultant that helped him do it, Alec Paul, who came on and talked about this stuff. We've seen it now in action. I think this LinkedIn, it's funny. We're doing our framework. I'm like, LinkedIn. Like, well, that's just one of the social channels. No, it's not. Like, it is one of the most important platforms for everyone to figure out their strategy on.
Well, the other piece I think is community and communities. And I think that there are a lot of companies that really want to do that and relatively few who have cracked the code.
Yes.
I like what Anthony Kanata is doing with Audience Plus around community, and I think one of his secrets is, that community, a big part of that is in-person events. And yeah, it's old school, right? But, if you put together a really good set of in-person events, you build community. And then how do you parlay the in-person event into the online community and kind of vice versa? I don't have all the secrets, but when I think about building reputation in 2024 and 2025. Those are my three pillars, right? Personal brand, content based on proprietary research, and community.
Yeah, so cool. So on number 2, on like Carta is a really good example. When we have questions on stuff like equity, we want to find out what Carta said. It's like there's the research. There also, this is again, in my opinion, this is what you guys did at Marketo too, which was like you became the trusted source of information on a particular topic. Yes, I follow the Carter research as well. I mean, it's my life and that they're just amazing at it. But also, man, like when we get questions, like we sort of verify what Carta says. That's that's reputation.
Yeah. Now, Carta also had some bad press for kind of, what they were doing. That matters too. My point is that matters too. And like stuff takes it's really hard to move the needle on. I mean, like just an example, if I may, like demand base, I think even today still probably has a reputation of being expensive, right? And that literally comes from like 2018, 2019, when they thought they were the premium brand and they were overcharging. And like I know for a fact, like that didn't continue until like 21, 22, 23, but the reputation stays, and it's very hard to move the needle on that stuff, and without massive amounts of time and energy and effort. And marketers don't spend enough time understanding their reputation and then being proactive about how to really think about moving it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's true for all ABX platforms, is they all have the reputation of being expensive. And you talk to startups and they're like, "Hey, I'm not adopting it because, it's gonna command too much budget and I need to allocate that towards something else." So I think that is definitely the case.
But to John's point, it's not true.
Sorry, just to be precise, I would say ABM platform as a budget line item is a big thing, and the entry level price is higher than what most startups can bite.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But I was more referring to demand basing is relatively more expensive than even some of the competition.
sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just as an example, reputation is hard, and even all card is amazing content, and a little bit of bad PR can still hurt that too. So
That's true. Yeah.
But to your point, like they know what, like, for example, I need or the portfolio needs, right? And so they've built that. We had, do you know Jade Shirk, John Henry Shirk, by any chance?
no,
Really good SEO guy. We had him on. Matt, he was talking about like he had a company he was working with from a content perspective, and they did, I think, international tax.
Mhm.
Like, and so they built the content to be not just old school SEO where it's like, what is this? And showing up on Google,
Mhm.
but to be the place that people went to verify they were doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Building on that a little bit. The other thing that we haven't talked enough about, I think, is just literally the nuts and bolts of positioning.
Mm.
I talk to so many marketing executives and CEOs even, and say, okay, you know, what is your company, what do you want planted in your customer's mind that they think of you as the best at compared to the competition? And it's got to be like one or two or three words. Almost no CMOs or CEOs I talk to can really articulate that, and even more so, and have every other single person in the company say the same thing. And like, how can you expect to sort of move your reputation brand in the marketplace, which will have this massive magnifying effect on everything else that you're doing, if you can't even get that crystal clear and articulate?
Yeah, that has been true. That is an amazing observation. Wait, go back. What was number 3 before you added that one?
When I talked about building reputation, I talked about personal brands, content from research, and communities.
Yeah, communities.
Yeah, and then I'm sort of saying positioning is almost like even a foundation below all that.
And when you think about positioning, John, do you think about the classic like is does means? Do you think about the means part, right? Like where it's like, what does this mean to the user? Like it's like HR made simple, like Rippling is HR made simple or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and what I'm really getting at is the how do we are connecting to our buyers' reptilian brains?
Mhm.
You know, what is that kind of, you know, how can we differentiate from the alternatives and kind of therefore own a distinct place in the buyer's mind, right? In their words, not our words. And again, like there's all these big boring examples. Like, when you think of Apple versus Samsung, you think of something, right? You have a feeling that you could probably put into one or two words, right? If you think of BMW versus Volvo, you think of something, that you can kind of put into some words. And yet, you know, we can't do that for our own companies usually. So yes, there are formal positioning frameworks and messaging docs and all that kind of stuff. And all that's important. And I'm not denying any of that. But I'm sort of almost more talking about this more fundamental thing.
Interesting. All right. So I was going on the community thing just really quick, you guys, and then we'll go back. I promise. I'm just sort of digging in here. So one thing I sort of have to combat, I'll just give contextually, is like the automatic assumption that the definition and ability to evaluate community is in a digital. I don't know that apps people use. It used to be like Jive and Get Satisfaction.
Yeah, now or we just a Slack, try to have a Slack community. And next thing you know, you have like 10, 12 different Slacks you're logged into and you don't have to check any of them.
But I do think that's an important differentiation, which is like if you take Anthony or even some of the other descriptions you had of community, like live events are community.
Mhm.
Uh, and then when you say like Anthony brings it to the website because he's bringing these folks that want to talk about what he's presenting in on via video and whatever that has on Audience Plus, and that is community building, which also sort of ties back to everything as well. And I think that's really important.
Probably a great example of community, even though it's quote unquote from the old school playbook, is the Marketo Marketing Nation, which was, people more than anything else, people felt affiliated to that. Like, I'm in the nation, I'm part of the nation. And there were 5 pillars to what we did to sort of build that. One was the user conference and the in-person events. One was the little physical digital community. And those were probably the biggest things, but it was also, we sort of put our whole partner ecosystem under that umbrella. So we kind of had community, go through that. We included a bunch of our content resources, under that. And then lastly, this part never did much, but the ability to kind of actually share best practices in the product, right? And collectively, that was the Marketing Nation. In many ways, probably in the early days, people bought Marketo because it was, easier and cheaper than Eloqua. By sort of the later days, people bought it just because they felt part of the Marketing Nation.
I agree. The other thing on you had these really cool things that I remember you and I were on some tour, John. It's like, and you had a Marketing Nation meeting, and there was a local user group in Marketing Nation. They had users that ran the meeting. John was actually a guest. He was co-founder. He was a guest in these. There was real ownership. It was I remember it was amazing. I went to it as I was with John. I mean, it was like 20 people at the time. You guys were growing. Uh, Sounds like a small amount, but that's where you start. That was a huge win. And then there was 2 folks, and I don't remember who they were, but they ran it to John, and that was incredible community ownership of that. That was, I mean, old school user group type play there, but like real.
There's a couple things about those. One, they were the Marketo user groups. We called them mugs. And like actually the small size was a good thing because there was intimacy to it and there was real conversations happening there. One, you have to remember like this was in the city of Atlanta, right? So it's a city that was like not the Atlanta that we know today just yet. It wasn't the tech hub that it's become now. So getting 20 people out to that who are all Marketo power users and all wanted to share information from one another in a weird way, to me, it's like that's better than getting 100 people who just came for the fruit tray and the free beers at the end, right? Like these were people that were having hardcore conversations about like real marketing ops topics around how to build this, how to build workflow between Salesforce and Marketo, etc. And that is like as much to me a part of the component of what the Marketo Marketing Nation was, is that it wasn't fluff. It was people that were really talking about this stuff. And I think there is something to be learned from that that can still be applied today, because if you have these really strong in-person events, it actually makes your digital community, I think, thrive a little bit more, because you know what you get when you go to the event. You know the people. Now you know them by name. And so you actually feel comfortable talking about them in a somewhat, anonymous function on Slack.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think there's a lot there, but we'll move on. So back on the positioning, but like, so John, I get the problem, but like, how do we get people to realize this 2 to 3 words on how we're described against the competition? Is there so you're in that scenario and they can't do it. What do you do to help them get there?
Well, I guess I start by saying I think that's a bigger part of the CMO and the marketing leadership's job than it has been.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
And I'm guilty of this. As a CMO, you come in, first thing you think you got to do is like revamp the website and then like change the demand gen programs, right? But like, did you get this positioning right first? And you can change the colors all you want, but or redesign the logo all you want, but get that positioning right first. So, and again, I think the real elephant in the room here that I alluded to earlier, is can the CMO actually have the time and space to do that properly in a world of MQL expectations and short-term pressures and PE firms asking for MQL counts and all the other stuff that's out there. I think we're going to actually see a change in kind of the marketing leaders who are the most successful, whereas the last 15 years sort of celebrated the most, operational and quantitative CMOs who could really build and tune the machine. I think, you probably think I'm going to say what we're going to need for the next 10 years are like the right brain creative CMOs who can do the brand and the messaging. But I don't think that that's it. What I think we actually need, for the next 10 years, the CMOs who are going to really excel at collaborating with their peers and leading the strategic dialogues around these business fundamentals, who can have conversations around how is marketing changing? Sorry, how is buying changing? How is go-to-market changing? And what does that mean for the role of marketing? And what does that mean for the way we should be even, measuring and investing in marketing? And ultimately, I buy into this whole trend of, not even calling the CMO the chief marketing officer, but calling them the chief market officer, to sort of move it away from sort of being about a function and into being more about, focusing on the strategy.
Well, you pull that out now at the end of the show, like a mic drop.
Well, that's not my idea. Other people have talked about that.
I know, but once you're on board, it's a lot different, man. That's amazing. End of the show, just dropping a bomb. That's incredible. No, I like it. I actually was talking to Adam Needles this morning. We were just talking about the show and how we're trying to redefine things. Like, well, I can tell you right now, I actually don't think you need a CMO anymore. I think you need by the way, don't worry, CMOs, he does mean you should exist. He thinks it's, bigger with like a bigger point of view there. And I think that's really interesting. So, dude, you're doing a lot of thinking on these things. You're going to go change the world again. So we're looking forward to, uh, seeing what you do there. And, it's been awesome just sort of going through these things with you and talking about this stuff. But I feel like we're just sort of, kind of just at the beginning of this conversation. And every time I talk to you, it feels like you're taking these ideas to market and learning as you're coming back. And the way you're talking about it continues to be not crisper, because that sounds like you always had a good point of view on this, but you're learning from like how people are behaving today as you go out and take this to market. So we definitely want to have this conversation with you again as you continue to learn here. And certainly as we start to continue to think about the changing playbook. Um, I would say, by the way, one thing, and I brought this up the other day that I do think about a lot. I'm just going to throw this out here, is when we think about radical change and playbook change, I think the vendors service providers, whoever that are changing the playbook. I think one thing that they miss in the go-to-market side that I think is really important is in many ways, this won't be exactly the way I'm thinking about it because I'm still crisping this up, but like started working backwards from the board deck. I still feel like ABM, we trained the market. We spent so much time trying to train the marketers to get off the MQL tip, but we didn't realize that that reporting had to go to someone up top that we actually trained to follow us by scoreboard. And so I'll give you an example, John. Like one of the really cool things you said, and by the way, AJ Gandhi said this to us on the pod, and he's PE, was like marketing will take time. Like you do need, and to put these sort of fundamentals in the new playbook into play. And so one thing, to think about, and certainly everyone should think about is, well, how do we position that? Because you will have to report on that to the ELT and to the board. Like, what does that look like? How does that position? How do we make our case on that level? I think is something that's really important. And now that I have this sort of purview, I'm like, man, like if you want to change the way we have to spend a lot of time with the functional leaders to help them think about the change. We have to enable them. We can't just go, here's what you should report on, because that's them, right? We have to say, here's how you should present. This is what we want to present to the top level. Just a thought. I think I brought it up the other day. I think it's really important, man, now that I'm seeing it. As we think about this new playbook, what does that mean for how we present what we're doing on the highest of levels? So anyway, I leave you with that tidbit. What do you think of that, John? Is that stupid? Is that bad?
I think it's exactly the conversation needs to happen. It needs to happen in the market, right? So that, like PE board, boards and CEOs and CFOs, kind of evolve their thinking, right? It's part of the reason I'm talking about this a lot. Yeah. Can I help marketers everywhere by sort of changing hearts and minds of investors and executives? And I think the marketing leaders themselves need to sort of figure out how to have those Socratic conversations, right? Don't come in and say, oh, we're changing how we're measuring marketing. We're not using MQLs anymore, right? Start and sit by like, hey, you know what? This isn't working. We need something different. It seems like buying is changing. Let's brainstorm together. How should we measure marketing in this new world? And like Socratically take them to sort of end up at the right place. Because as you said, until the board deck changes, until the metrics change, marketing can't change.
Yep. Perfect. All right, cool. Well, that was awesome, man. And looking forward to having you on the show again with new learnings. Really appreciate it. And that's what we're trying to do on the transaction is talk about different ways of thinking. So thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Transaction. Craig and I really appreciate the fact that you've listened all the way to the end. What are you actually doing here? For show notes and other episodes, please visit us at thetransactionpod.com. Like and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other place you get your podcast from. The Transaction is sponsored and produced by Ringmaster, the go-to branded podcast team. To discover how your company can leverage B2B podcasts to deliver outsized ROI, visit ringmaster.com now. Either you have walked away from your podcast device, or this is playing somewhere in the background. Someone in your house would really like for you to shut this off now.